Delighted to have you here this afternoon. Let's stand for a word of prayer as we prepare for this wonderful time here today. Let's pray together. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the opportunity we have to hear the music we're going to hear and to hear the story of a life that you have touched. Lord, it's just a joy to have this opportunity. Bless each one that is here now, I pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you. You may be seated. It is my joy to be able to introduce to you world-renowned pianist Sam Rotman, as he's going to come and give us some tremendous music and his story. So let's welcome Mr. Rotman here this afternoon.
Thank you. It's a privilege to be here and appreciate the opportunity. What a beautiful day and afternoon, and thank you for coming. Let me mention just a couple of things. Everybody should have a program. Who does not have a program? Are there people without a program? I don't see. Okay, if there's a lady here without a program, it's important because I will refer to it many times, and if you have it in front of you, anybody does not have a program, just raise your hand. Here's a couple of people that need a program right over here on the left. Here's a couple people that needs a program. I hope I just shared that. I know it takes a few minutes. And over here are a few people right there. Everyone else has a program? Okay. Oh, right here. Very good. Thank you. So while they're doing that, the program's about an hour and a half, just to let you know, an hour and 35 minutes. It's classical music. It's not hymn arrangements. It's classical music. I'm going to introduce the pieces and share with you and play music, and then I'm going to share my story and how music's not the most important thing in my life. So this is sort of a unique concert. If you look at the program, this is in celebration of the 250th anniversary of the birth of Beethoven. So Beethoven was born in 1770, December 16th, the end of the year, December 16th. And last year was the Beethoven year. It was going to be the biggest celebration in the history of classical music. And then COVID hit. And I had about 60 concerts, all canceled, or postponed, I should say. And I thought, well, now what do we do? And now I'm starting to play again. 7 months, I had only one virtual concert that I gave. So what do I do? Well, I thought, Beethoven doesn't turn 251 until December 16th of 2021. So he's still 250. He's still 250. So I'm doing all these Beethoven concerts because it may not be the Beethoven year of 2020, but he hasn't turned, so I'm very thankful that he wasn't born on January 1st. He was born on December 18th, or 16th, I should say. So all the way to December 16th, and I have a concert on December 15th, which is the last day of his 250, and then I have a concert on December 16th, which is the first day of his 251. So this is in celebration of Beethoven, my favorite composer. So that's what the music is, the program, what we're going to share, and so let's start right in. Look at your program. The first piece on the program is the first piece Beethoven ever wrote for the piano. Now that's unique. The piece is not played, it's a tremendous piece, seminal piece, because from this was going to come what was going to lie ahead. But first piece, he was 25 years old. Beethoven was a great pianist. He had given concerts of other composers, Mozart and Haydn and Bach, of course. But of course, they knew he was composing. This is his first piece. It's in 4 parts, if you see there underneath. Allegro is lively. The second movement is slow. To me, the most profound part is the second part, the slow part. The third part is a little dance, and the fourth part is very fast. Now, this is what's unique about the piece. When Beethoven composed and played this piece, in one night, music changed forever. In one night, music changed forever. Because nobody ever wrote music this dramatic or intense. Music, to many people, was entertainment. Other composers, Mozart, Haydn, they wrote music for the court, background music, not Beethoven. My music is not entertainment. It is the power of the human soul. And so he literally, music would never so dramatic in your face of emotions in that sense. So notice, if you can, who it's dedicated to. Beethoven was very important in who he wrote pieces to and who he dedicated pieces to. This is dedicated to a composer named Franz Joseph Haydn. Haydn was a very prominent composer during the classical period. He was 24 years older than Mozart and was a mentor to Mozart, and 38 years older than Beethoven, and taught Beethoven for a while. So Beethoven says, I acknowledge the great Haydn. He was known as Papa Haydn because he was so much older. I acknowledge Haydn. I thank him for this, for his guiding me, his teaching me. And so it's a thank you. It's an acknowledgement of thanks to Franz Joseph Haydn, this great composer who wrote many symphonies, many pieces, quartets, 50+ quartets. So this is the first piece for the piano by Beethoven. Thank you very much. Thank you. So 18 months after Beethoven played this piece, something happened to Beethoven that would change his life forever. And that is, he began to go deaf. He began to have ringing in his right ear and then ringing in his left ear. He went to see some doctors who basically gave him horns to funnel the sound. And then eventually the ringing began to go away, and he thought, oh, I'm getting cured. The ringing is going away, but the ringing was going away because his hearing was going away. And for the next 5¼ years, Beethoven began this sad, long descent into becoming totally deaf. Some of the greatest music your ears will ever hear was written by a man who couldn't hear it. 80% of what he wrote was in deafness. So people have asked me for 40 years, how does a man write music if he can't hear it? How did Beethoven write music if he can't hear it? So, of course, Beethoven knew that you don't need to hear music with your ears to hear music in your head. So I'm going to give you the example. I'm going to sing for you the Star-Spangled Banner. Oh, Jose. Do you hear the Star-Spangled Banner? You sure do. You hear it in your head. Right now, I can hear Amazing Grace. You can all hear it. Listen. I hear Amazing Grace. So this is the big difference between Beethoven, who's a cosmic genius, and Sam Rotman, who's a speck of dust with air pumped in me. Let's make it very clear what we're talking about. You know, and I know the Star-Spangled Banner because you've heard the Star-Spangled Banner. And you know Amazing Grace because you've heard it. Beethoven heard music that nobody ever heard. That nobody ever heard. And I have a book called Beethoven in His Own Words. It's excerpts from letters and a diary that he kept about composing and different topics. And a man wrote to Beethoven, he said, where do you get the musical ideas in your head, in your mind, or where does it come from? And Beethoven wrote back, and I'm quoting verbatim, the music in my mind has been given to me by the Almighty, and I am just putting it down on paper for him. You realize what a statement that is? God gives me this music, and I'm taking ink on a white piece of paper and putting down dots for him. The reason I share all this is because the next piece on your program was written while Beethoven was going deaf. That's my point. And it's a famous piece called the Pathetique. Now, the word pathetique comes from the Greek word pathos, which means suffering. Many people think it means the emotions of it. It is not the emotions. It is the suffering. That's where we get the pathos, the Christus, the suffering of Christ. The passion of Christ is the suffering of Christ. And that's where we get the same word, the pathos, and it's called pathetique. And Beethoven was going through a lot of suffering. In the first 15 seconds, you're going to hear these chords that is absolute suffering. In German, it's called Angst. Angst is inner turmoil and pain and suffering. The piece gets very fast, very agitated, and then at one point when my right hand goes over my left hand, this is Beethoven having a conversation with himself. He's talking to him. He talks, he answers. He questions, he answers. The second movement is a prayer. Some of my friends believe this is the most beautiful piece Beethoven ever wrote, I should say. It's like a prayer. It's peace, resignation, absolute beauty. I sometimes try to play it without breathing. It is so pure. The third movement, again, is very tumultuous, very energetic, and at the end of the piece, Beethoven is hitting the piano with his fist. Now, not literally his fist, but there is these chords at the end of the third movement that he's accentuating almost like a fist because he can't hear anything from the piano. And he's hitting the piano because he wants to hear. Now, it's dedicated to someone, if you look at that program, Prince Karl von Lichnowsky, Who is this man? Prince Lichnowsky was Polish, a prince, aristocracy, nobility, and he loved the arts. He had a palace in Vienna. And every Friday he put on a concert. And if you were anybody in Vienna, you were on that program. And if you were anybody in Vienna, you came to the program. And he made sure that Beethoven was on every Friday program. He literally opened up the world of Beethoven's music to Vienna, to the people of Vienna, and from there it spread like wildfire. People believe that when Beethoven died in 1827, he was perhaps the most famous man in all of Europe. 20,000 people came to his funeral. They literally had to wait because so many people were coming from Prague and from Paris for the funeral of Beethoven. And so again, even though it's a tumultuous piece, he acknowledges Prince Lichnowsky, thanking him for opening up his music to Vienna, to the world, to Europe, etc. So that's who it's dedicated to. Beethoven wrote 32 of these pieces. Sonata, the first one I played was number 1, if you look at your program. This is Sonata number 8. Sonata number 8. This is the Pathetique by Beethoven. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. So the next piece I'm going to play, and then after that I'll share my story. And the last piece is very short, a very short 5-minute piece. So it's not 4 long pieces. The next piece is my story, and then my last piece. So I told you Beethoven wrote 32 sonatas. The next one is Sonata number 26. Beethoven is very famous. Beethoven is very adulated. He's writing an amazing amount of music. And the secret to this next piece is who it's dedicated to. If you look at the program, it is dedicated to a man named the Archduke Rudolf Reiner. So who is this man? This man was the youngest son of Leopold II, who was the Emperor of Austria. So this would be like Prince Charles to Queen Elizabeth, the son of the Queen. He was the son of the Emperor. And he was called the Archduke, Rudolf Reiner. He befriended Beethoven, and this is what he told Beethoven. Beethoven, you write music, and I'll pay all your bills. Don't teach. Don't go to a university. Beethoven was invited to be the music director of a city in Germany. Beethoven was German, Bonn, Germany, and then he came to Vienna because that's where Mozart and Haydn were and others. He was invited to go back to Germany. He said, don't go. You write music and I'll pay your bills. And he did. 14 of the greatest pieces Beethoven ever wrote are dedicated to him, dedicated to this one man. Now, by this time, Beethoven told the Archduke that he didn't need his money. It had been already about 10 years. Beethoven was very well off financially, very successful, but he said, I don't need your help financially, I need your help as a friend. And this is a guy that stayed with Beethoven through many difficulties. His deafness, his being misunderstood. This is a man that stood closer than a brother. In May of 1809, Napoleon, you know who he is. He is the Emperor of France, invaded Austria. And Leopold decided to take his family and his government in exile, not giving up, but to safety reasons. And so Beethoven pleads with the Archduke, please don't leave me, please don't leave Vienna. And this piece is called, look at your program, the Farewell Sonata. Do you see that? Lebewohl. That's why it's written. This was the experience of this close friend, the Archduke, having to leave Vienna, and Beethoven asked him not to leave. So let me say 2 things. I speak German. There's 2 ways to say goodbye in German. The most common way, 99% of the time, is to say Auf Wiedersehen. And Auf Wiedersehen literally means auf, after, wieder, again, sehen, to see you. So after, again, I'll see you. Lebewohl is what you say to somebody when you will never see them again. In fact, it's used many times on a person's deathbed. You say your final Lebewohl, Lebewohl. And Beethoven calls this piece Lebewohl. He never expected to see him again. In fact, it starts off very slow. And on the first 3 notes, Beethoven did something that he never did in any other piece of music that I'm aware of, if it was not vocal music. Beethoven writes over the first 3 notes 3 words, Lebewohl. He actually writes the words on the first 3 notes. And throughout the piece, you'll hear these 3 descending notes. Sometimes Beethoven says it, the Archduke says it. My right hand is Beethoven, my left hand is the Archduke. They literally argue. You can hear them yelling at each other. It sounds like human chatter. Beethoven asks him a question, he answers. He asks him, he answers. And at the very end of the piece, you can actually hear the horses of the chariot, of the carriage, leaving. My right hand goes to the top of the piano, My left hand goes to the bottom of the piano, and Beethoven writes visually and emotionally and musically the separation. The piece actually ends. And at that time, these were the highest and lowest notes on the piano. Beethoven couldn't go any farther. It was a 72-key piano. He never had the 88-key piano. The second movement was written, if you notice, it's called The Absence. He's gone. And this is Beethoven writing it while he's gone. Now, there's many cartoons meaning drawings of Beethoven taking walks. He would take walks every day in parks. And he always walked like this. He had his right hand in the hand of his left hand. He would walk like this. And when he stopped, he would take out a pad and he'd write down, this is where music came to him, and he'd write it down. So in this second movement, there's some sadness and pain, and at 2 times there's parts where Beethoven is all by himself. There's nothing in the left hand. He's all by himself, all by himself. It stops as if he's stopping to write this movement. On January 30th, 1810, 9 months later, the Archduke returned to Vienna. And it's called, if you notice, the third movement, The Return. And Beethoven saw him, they ran to each other, they greeted each other, and Beethoven went home and composed this piece in one sitting. In one sitting. It is absolute joy, exuberance, chatter again. Now, I share this just personally. My father was born in Romania. My mother was born in, at that time it was called Czechoslovakia. And I remember as a little boy, my parents came in 1950. There would be other Jewish friends they had from Romania and from Slovakia. And my mother and father would take walks in the mall, you know, a mall where they have shops. And my father was always with his male friend, the husband of the couple, and they would always have arms locked together like this. Of course, they didn't hold hands. They would just be like this. And they would walk together in the mall. My mother did the same. She would have her arms locked with her female friend, the wife of the husband. I share this with you because that's very Eastern European. And at 2 places in this third movement, you can literally see the Archduke and Beethoven actually locked elbow to elbow in absolute exuberance to be together. It's amazing. So this is now much later in Beethoven's life, a very personal piece. The 3 notes, the Lebewohl, the farewell, the separation of hand, the absence, the return, and then my story. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very, very much. Well, before I play the last piece, which is very short, 5 minutes long, I'd like to take a moment and share about myself. And my story really begins with my parents. My father was born in Eastern Europe, in Romania, in 1905. My mother was born in Eastern Europe. At that time, the country was called Czechoslovakia. She was born there in 1915, so my parents were 10 years difference in age. And they were both very religious Orthodox Jews. Now, the Orthodox Jews are really the strictest adherers to Judaism. They really seek to follow the laws that God gave to the Jewish people through Moses. They really want to follow the Torah, the Pentateuch. And my parents left Europe in 1940 for one reason, Adolf Hitler and the Nazis. If my parents stayed in Europe, they both would have been murdered. Everybody that stayed in their town was executed. My father was 35, my mother was 25. If they would have stayed, they would have been sent to a concentration camp and exterminated, or sent to a labor camp. And once you got sick at a labor camp, they just shot you and killed you because there was no time for you to get better. 11 months after my parents left Europe, the Nazis came to his region of Romania in 1940, and 1941, December of 1941. And specifically, they gathered all the Jews, 10,000 Jews in that region, and over a 2-week period systematically murdered every one of them. 2 of them were my grandparents, my father's parents. He had a sister that was taken to a concentration camp and never heard from again. So in 1940, my parents had to get out of Europe. And so like a lot of Jews, they ended up in South America. Countries in South America had a welcoming for Jewish exiles, immigrants, refugees. And my parents ended up in a small country called Ecuador, right on the equator, Quito, Ecuador. My brother was born there. My sister was born there. My mother was pregnant with me. And in the spring of 1950, my father filled out paperwork to bring his family to the United States. He got permission. They went through New York City, and I was born 5 months later in October of 1950. And as you can imagine, I was raised in a very, very religious Jewish home. My parents sent me to public school during the day, and then after that, I went to school in the synagogue, and it was called Hebrew school. So there's Catholic schools or Christian schools, but there are some, not many, Hebrew school. And I went to Hebrew school 5 days a week for 8 years. 5 days a week for 8 years. This was very important to me. My grandparents died for being Jewish. My parents suffered for being Jewish. And I was going to identify with everything I could with my Jewish heritage. All my friends were Jewish. All my relatives were Jewish. I started Hebrew school when I was 8 until I was 16, so you can imagine all those years of growing up, this had a big impact on me, very big. This was not, I don't say this to be funny, it was not a 2-week course. It was a life commitment. I remember I'd wake up in the morning, I'd pray for a half an hour in Hebrew, and then I went to school, and something unusual happened. It sounds funny now, but it was not funny at the time. But as I was growing older, 11, 12 years old, I began to develop a very foul mouth. I could curse very easily. I could lie to my teachers very easily. I could lie to my parents. I was very religious in the synagogue, and these prayers meant a lot to me. I mean, this was important. And I remember realizing and thinking it was easy to be religious. It was easy to be religious. And then an hour later, I'm swearing and cursing and lying, and that was easy. It was easy for me to be religious when I had to, and it was easy for me to be a sinner or irreligious when I wanted to. Sadly, I was good at both, sadly. Then when I was 17, I went to music school in New York City, the Juilliard School. I was there for 5 years and got a bachelor's and a master's in piano. And there I met 3 students who called themselves born-again Christians. Well, I had no idea what that meant. But there was something about them that was quite unusual. Every time I saw one of them having their lunch, a sandwich in the cafeteria, I saw another one taking a break from practicing. They were always reading the Bible. The Bible. I mean, this is not a school of religion. It's a school of music. And these were highly respected students in the school, very talented. And when they got together, all they did was talk about Jesus. Jesus did this, and Jesus said this. And what did Jesus mean when he said this? And what did Jesus mean when he did this? They never mentioned church. I had no idea about church. They never mentioned the C word, Christianity. It was always Jesus and Jesus and Jesus and Jesus and Jesus and Yeshua in Hebrew. Well, they heard I was a religious Jew, and they began to talk to me. And they basically asked me two questions. They asked me if I ever read the New Testament. And I told them, nope, not a word. I was told it was not a Jewish book. It was not for the Jews. You'd never find a New Testament in our home. So I had no idea what was in it. Nothing. Zero knowledge. Never saw one, never read one, never touched one, nothing. They asked me if I thought if this Jesus could be the Jewish Messiah. You know, the Jews are waiting for the Messiah. In Hebrew, it's Mashiach. Mashiach. I said, no, Jesus is not the salvation for Jewish people. But you know, I was very moral. I didn't want to do anything to hurt my parents. My parents almost died for me. They sacrificed for me. I didn't want to shame them. So I never drank alcohol. To this day, I still don't know what a beer tastes like. Never been drunk. Never took drugs. You know, I lived in New York City from 1968 to 1973. That's the height of the Vietnam War. That was the height of the hippie movement, if you knew about hippies. And it was all about free love, free this, peace. And let me tell you, I lived at 71st Street and Broadway. That's known as Uptown Manhattan. I had a room in an apartment. And it's not what drugs you wanted, it's how much drugs you wanted. I never took anything, never. Never had premarital sex. So even though I was so moral on the outside, no sex, no drugs, no drinking, my friend, I'm going to tell you, I was very, very, very immoral. Immoral. You know where? Right here. I knew I was not on the inside the way I could appear on the outside. I could do many, many Jewish things, but it never affected me on the inside. I was very moral. I was very religious, but not changed. The same foul-mouthed, dirty-minded, self-centered, egotistical person at 20, at 18, at 16, at 14. Nothing changed about me except I was getting older. The same sins, the same problems, the same issues. So I made a big decision. I said, if I want to know about this person, Jesus Christ, I'm going to read this book, the New Testament. Now, that was a big step for a Jew. And I didn't want to talk to a rabbi or a priest or a minister. I'm not going to let anybody tell me what I'm reading. I'm going to read this book myself. Now, when I was a student at Juilliard, I used to practice for 10 hours a day. Now, let me tell you, that's not a lie or an exaggeration. I did not sit at the piano for 9 hours and 45 minutes. I sat every day at the piano for 10 full hours. I never left Juilliard until I practiced 10 full hours. I started to read the New Testament, and my whole life came to a stop. I was absolutely shocked when I began to read this book. For the first time in my life since I started piano as a 9-year-old boy, I completely stopped practicing. Now, these friends had given me a little pocket New Testament. And they said, well, if you read it, if you want to read it, here you have it. And if you read it, start in this book called The Gospel of John. Okay. So I looked at it. Here it is, The Gospel of John. And here I read a man, Jesus, who said of himself, I am the light of the world. Wow, are you kidding me? You know, when a Jew reads a word like that, you know what they think of immediately? Only one other person said something like that. In Genesis chapter 1, God said, let there be light. And Jesus said, I am the light. Here's a man, Jesus, who said of himself, I am the bread of life. Here's a man, Jesus, who said of himself, no person comes to God, my Father, except through me. He who has the Son of God has life. He who does not have the Son of God does not have life. I am the vine, you are the branches. Without me, you can do nothing. I was shocked at the words and the claims of who Jesus said he was. So, we're in a wonderful church here, wonderful church. Forgive me if you can. I'm going to tell you what I said to myself. I said, this is beyond the pale. Moses never said words like this. Abraham never said words like this. I was shocked that Jesus would say such claims. And I was going to throw away the Bible. I was going to go practice. I'm going to go. And at that second, I said to myself, Sam, if this Jesus is who he says he is, let me repeat that again. If this person Jesus is who he says he is, Jesus, who are you? You want to know who I am? I am the light of the world. I may be making the biggest mistake of my life throwing this book away. I better listen to him. And then Jesus said he came for sinners. I was not a sinner. I was very moral. I was very religious. I spent my whole life looking good for God. I was on God's side. But Jesus said he came to bring forgiveness, and he said he came to change us on the inside. He called it a new heart, a new birth, a new life, a spiritual heart, a spiritual birth, a spiritual life. So, I've played concerts in 61 different countries. I've been all through Asia, South Africa, Middle of Africa, all through South America, been to Cuba twice, almost every country in Europe. And let me tell you what I've learned. 61 countries. My friend, it doesn't matter what your skin color is. It does not matter what your skin color is. It doesn't matter, my friend, if you're a Democrat, Republican, Labor Party, Independent Party. It doesn't matter if you're a Christian, a Hindu, a Buddhist, a Muslim. It doesn't matter what language you speak. It doesn't matter what culture you have, because I'm telling you this truth. Everybody in this world, 7.5 billion people, and everybody in this room, we are experts at hiding things. We have made lying, with this little instrument, we have made lying into an art. You can hide things from your husband. You can hide things from your wife. You can hide things from your children. You can hide things from your parents. You can hide things from your boss. But my friend, nobody hides anything from Jesus Christ. Nobody. Whatever you've said in secret is going to be shouted from the housetop. And every word you say, you're going to give an answer. And listen to me carefully, each of you, young person, senior, even though I was so moral, I was so religious, I thought I was clever enough with my tongue, and I was crafty enough with my mind that I thought I could hide things from people and God. Nobody could do it like Sam Rotman. And on May 21st, 1971, 50 years ago, and 3 months ago, and 1 day ago, if you want to be precise, for the first time I prayed to Jesus Christ. And I'm going to tell you what I said. My name is Sam Rotman, and Jesus, I want you to take over my life. It's very simple. I want you to tell me what to do, and I will not tell you what to do. I told Jesus the lies I said. I told Jesus the dirty thoughts I had. I told Jesus the immoral words I said. I decided two things. I decided I'm not going to hide anything from Jesus. Do you know something? You don't need to hide anything from Jesus, because you're not hiding anything from Jesus. And I decided I'm not going to make any excuses for anything I've done. Can you imagine? You can come to Jesus Christ, and you don't need to give him an excuse for anything you've ever done in your life. In fact, if you give him an excuse, you're making it complicated. It's not complicated. We make it complicated. It was a long prayer. And I finished praying, and I opened up my eyes, and in a billionth of a second, immediately, I knew that Jesus Christ completely transformed me on the inside. I had a dirty, filthy mouth, and he cleaned it. A dirty, filthy mind, and he cleaned it. I was shocked I stopped cursing. And I remember a few moments later, like 3 minutes later, I couldn't form a curse word with my lips even if I wanted to. The first thing I did in the morning is that I woke up and I read more about Jesus. I prayed to Jesus, and I went to Juilliard, and I told every Jewish friend and student I had at Juilliard, I have met the Messiah. I have met the Messiah. And his name is Yeshua HaMashiach, Jesus the Messiah. I've played over 3,100 concerts, and I can tell you, my friend, that all of my concerts are nothing. You know how much nothing is? My 3,100 concerts are nothing compared to having Jesus Christ. The greatest thing I ever did in my life, the most important thing I ever did in my life, was to give my life to Jesus Christ. Music's not the most important thing in my life. Jesus is, because listen, my friend, only Jesus Christ can transform your heart, period. Your wife can't change you. Your husband can't change you. Your children can't change you. Your parents can't change you. The church can't change you. The government can't change you. Let me tell you something. You cannot change you. The hardest person to live with is you. But this is a miracle. Let me tell you, being cured of cancer is a miracle. But this is the real miracle. The miracle in this world is that Jesus Christ actually transforms the human heart. That's an absolute miracle. That's an absolute miracle. You know why I was Jewish? I was born Jewish. That's the only reason I was Jewish. If I was born in Egypt, I'd be a Muslim. If I was born in India, I've done concerts, I'd be a Hindu. If I was born in Thailand, where I play, I'd be a Buddhist. It's not a religion, my friend, it's a person. The central person of human history. Every time you write 2021, you're acknowledging Jesus Christ, the central man or person of human history. Can I tell you something on the side for a moment? You know what's the first thing you see when you walk into a synagogue? Any synagogue, Orthodox, conservative, Reformed, the first thing you see in every synagogue is the law of Moses, the law of God, the 10 Commandments, the law that God gave to the Jewish people. Every synagogue, it's right there in the sanctuary. You know what's the first thing you see in a church? You know what I call it? Forgiveness. Forgiveness. And there's a lot of forgiveness there because I need a lot of forgiveness here. Every time you see that cross, every time someone you see wears a cross, you drive and you see a church and there's a cross, God's telling you, I have made a way to forgive you. I invite you to let me forgive you. I really would love to forgive you. And you can do what I did. You can say your name. My name is, tell him your name. And I want you, Jesus, to take over my life. And he will. And I want you to be with me. And he will. I want you to forgive me. And he will. I want you to guide me. Salvation is not what you will ever do for Jesus Christ. Salvation is everything that Jesus Christ has already done for you. Nothing in my hands I bring. Don't bring your 3,100 concerts to me, Sam. Nothing in my hands I bring. Simply to the cross in Jesus Christ I cling. And I play the piano for Jesus Christ. He gave me the ears to hear the music, the fingers to play the music, the mind to learn the music. You know that Jesus has never missed one of my concerts. I know it sounds cute, but it's very real. And every time I give a concert in a church, in a hall, college, university, with an orchestra, he's in the front row. When I sit down to play, he always says the same thing to me. He says, Sam, I'm really looking forward to hearing you play for me this afternoon. My friend, if I could look into your eyes, each one of you, I would tell you with every fiber of my being, my friend, listen, it's worth living for Jesus Christ. Listen, he's worth it. He's not a joke. He's not a phantom. He's not magic. He's not hocus pocus. He's not a curse word. He's not even a nice Christmas story. He is the life and the light of the world. Don't let anything become an excuse to keep you from the amazing life there is in Jesus Christ. Let me repeat that again. Don't let anything become an excuse to keep you from the amazing life there is in Jesus Christ. I had a million excuses. A million. As an Orthodox Jew, your past can disappoint you. A church can disappoint you. They're not worth it. He's worth it. And I can tell you, whether it's Jewish people here or not, I do not know. But this is what I do know. Jesus was Jewish. And his followers were Jewish. And every writer that wrote in the New Testament, except one, 37 out of 39 books were written by Jews. And 99% of what Jesus as the Messiah did on this earth was among the Jews and for the Jews and speaking to the Jews. And yet it's not a Jewish book. My friend, it's the most Jewish book you'll ever read in your life. About the greatest Jew whose followers were Jews, who did everything among Jews, and was written by Jews. I've come to see the fulfillment of all things as a Jew, the Messiah. Hallelujah. What a man. What a Savior. What a gift. Music gives me a lot of happiness, but not one note of music will ever change me. I'll play about 40,000 notes tonight. It's a lot of Beethoven. Some of these pages are pretty black. Not one note will change me. Jesus Christ, Yeshua HaMashiach, the Messiah, changed me, transformed me, gave me a new life. My friend, it is worth living for him. It is worth living for him. The last piece will be done in 5 minutes. Look at your program. Last piece. This is the piece you've all heard. Maybe you have no knowledge of classical music, but you've heard this piece. It's called the Turkish March. Very, very famous piece. Beethoven heard this march played by some street musicians in Vienna. And he wrote it down in his sketchbook while he was still hearing in his 20s. And he liked this march. And 20 years later, he wrote this piece. So he kept this melody, and then he decided, now I know where to use it. So this is this march, and then you have these 6 variations, and each variation is a little different mood based on this march, and at the end, you have the march again. So it's the march, the 6 variations, the march by Beethoven. Now, what's very interesting is who it's dedicated to. That's why I have the program. Look at your program. It's dedicated to a man named Franz Oliva. You know who Franz Oliva was? He was Beethoven's accountant. He was his tax man. He took care of all of Beethoven's finances for 20 years. And he said to Franz, you have been my great friend, organized all my finances, and I'm going to dedicate this little happy piece for you. So about 6 months ago, I realized that Beethoven wrote and dedicated pieces to counts, so-and-so, or countesses. For instance, the famous Moonlight Sonata is dedicated to Count Juliette Guicciardi, a woman who was a countess. He dedicated the pieces to counts, countesses, and his accountant. I like that. I was proud of myself when I came up with that. Isn't that great? I write for counts, countesses, and even my accountant. So this is the last piece, the Turkish March Variations by Beethoven. Thank you. Please be seated just for a moment before the pastor comes up. You know what I like about 2 o'clock concerts is that it's not 8 o'clock already or so, but let me just ask you this very briefly. If I can, does anybody have a question you'd like to ask me? Sometimes in an intimate setting like this, a question about my life, my music, my social security number. And anybody have a question? You like, yes, ma'am.
I was just wondering if any of the friends you went back to after you were saved, if they got saved.
Oh, well, some of the people that were not believers, yes, 2 of them did. 2 of them did. And actually, in the last year, 2 of them did initially. But in the last year, I heard from 2 people, one in Rochester, New York, and one in Atlanta, Georgia, who I witnessed to at Juilliard, and one came to Christ 3 years later, and one came to Christ 5 years later, and I never knew it. I never knew it. I had given concerts in Hawaii, and one day I got a call from the pastor where I'd given a concert years ago in Hawaii. He said, Sam, there was a man in my church yesterday. He's vacationing in Hawaii, and he visited my church. And I said, what do you do? He says, oh, I'm a musician. I'm a pianist. He said, oh, is that right? Yeah. Do you play? Where'd you go to school? I went to Juilliard. And I said, oh, I have a friend who's done concerts here in my church in Hawaii from Juilliard. His name is Sam Rotman. He's the one that witnessed to me, and I never knew it. And I got his phone number, and we spoke for 3.5 hours. And he said, Sam, now you can see what God did with a little seed and how he worked on it for 48 years and what he's done. So there it is, yeah. So, hey, you just, like the sower and the seed, you spread the word. Someone else, any question? Yes, sir. Oh, yes, I've been to Israel. I gave 14 concerts. The first trip in Israel I gave in Israel, I gave 14 concerts, all the way from the north in Tiberias, all the way to Beersheba, all over, Jerusalem, Haifa. So I have been to Yad Vashem. And in Yad Vashem, they have these like monoliths engraved of different sites of Holocaust and massacres. And there is the one literally listed, Yedinetz, where my grandparents were perished. And I tell you this, they also have a special place in Yad Vashem where they list the names of children under 18. Do you know that? They never stop. And my aunt, which was my father's sister, who was 16 when she was taken to a con, was never listed. So I submitted her name, I submitted some documents, and then I heard from Yad Vashem officially that they made research and they found out she was among the Holocaust in a concentration camp, and now she's on the list of who they recite of children under 18 who died in the Holocaust. Yeah, it was very moving to me. Anyone else? Any question? Well, let me mention very briefly, I have some CDs in the lobby. One is a DVD of my whole testimony. So everything I shared here, it's called The Music and Testimony of Sam Rotman, and so I play on that as well, but it's a documentary. It's something you watch. Then there's 4 recordings. One is all Beethoven, my favorite. It even has the Moonlight Sonata, the famous whole Moonlight Sonata. Then there's a recording of Debussy. Debussy, I love French music. It has Clair de Lune on it. It's literally droplets of sound. You listen to the Debussy recording and all the stress goes out of you. You'll become a puddle of water in the living room. And then I have a recording of all Russian music. You know what happens when you listen to Russian music? All the stress goes back into you. Playing it does. If this is 40,000 notes, Rachmaninoff is 80,000 notes. I once did an all Rachmaninoff program for 1.5 years. It was brutal. So there's a Russian, and then there's a variety of 6 composers: Mozart, Beethoven, Schubert, Chopin, Debussy, Rachmaninoff. So there's all Beethoven, all French, all Russian, and a variety DVD. There's nothing repeated. No songs are repeated. They're $15 each. There's no tax. The autograph is free. And about 25 years ago, I gave a concert in Arizona. And I said, tonight the CD is free. No, the CD is free, yes, and the autograph is $15. And a man, sure enough, came up to me and said, I'd like a CD with no autograph. I will not tell you what I said to him. But so this has been tremendous. You know, I've been here since Wednesday afternoon. I want to really thank Mrs. Zempel and her leadership and being here, and the pastor and the church, and Ben. Ben has been who here is here and going to be in the seminary. They have been. You guys are the host and the hostess with the most and the mostest. This has been wonderful to be here. I want to really commend the church. So it's been a privilege to be here. I hope I've imparted some encouragement for the students and guidance and a blessing to you. And you know what, I say this very much, I'm very much aware of it. Thank you, Jesus Christ, who made it all possible. That's the bottom line. So, Pastor, come on up. I'll play for an offering. I'll be in the back in the lobby. Thank you for coming.
All right. What a blessing here. We do want to take now a free will offering that will go toward Mr. Rotman. He comes on the basis of that. Isn't that an amazing thing for his caliber? And I think we need to give him, with all the work that he has done for days here, to invest in our young people, we need to give a great offering. You can also give online. And if you do make a check out, if you would make it out to Falls Baptist Church, we'll make sure that everything in this offering goes directly to him. And so we would appreciate that. And so ushers, if you'll come, Mr. Rotman will play at this time. Well, are you glad you came? Wasn't that a delightful afternoon and a wonderful encouragement to us? So you are dismissed. Thank you for coming.